As a Green Beret from the 1st Special Operations Regiment, under the Joint Special Operations Command, our company was a unique breed. Stationed at Fort Bragg, we were a group of 90 elite soldiers, organized into 3 maneuver platoons and 1 heavy weapons platoon, each comprising 22 warriors, plus a command element led by our unit commander and first sergeant. Unlike conventional units, our mission wasn't just overseas. We were the sword and shield against domestic threats to our nation. Our particular company, part of the 4 regiments under JSOC's deep strike operations, was assigned a mission of unparalleled importance. Captain Jenkins, our unit commander, briefed us extensively, and we spent weeks in Clarion meticulously planning every move. Our strategy was clear-cut. 1st Platoon, led by Lieutenant Wilson, would initiate an attack from the north, supported by Lieutenant Lynch's heavy weapons. As they engaged, Captain Jenkins and 2nd Platoon would exploit any weakness in the rebel lines to the east. I was tasked to lead my 3rd Platoon through the breach into the heart of the rebel compound, a sprawling, fortified area spanning roughly 2 miles in Killeen, Texas. This wasn't just any compound. It was a fortress, ringed with razor wire, concrete barriers and bunkers, housing an estimated 300 to 400 fighters and numerous civilian terrorists. Our intelligence suggested they were using civilians as human shields, complicating our assault. Central to our operation was a 2-story concrete building heavily guarded and armed. This building held the rebels' sacred parchment, the source of their fanatical drive. Securing this document meant crippling their morale and possibly ending the conflict. My platoon, alongside Lieutenant Wilson's, had the critical task of securing this building and retrieving the parchment. This mission brooked no half measures. Our orders were explicit: eliminate all threats, no prisoners. Speed and ferocity were our allies. Once we breached, we hoped to call in Apache helicopters from Fort Hood to decimate any remaining resistance. The rebel faction, led by a former Army Major General named Lincoln, was a motley crew of traitors from various military divisions, infantry from Kansas, cavalry from Texas, and even elements from the Marinas, Air Force, and Navy. They had all fallen under the corrupt influence of the parchment, committing unspeakable acts against the nation. Our campaign against these traitors was relentless and unforgiving. Anyone who had turned against the country was dealt with swiftly and decisively. We were the true patriots, fighting to save our nation from internal decay and destruction. The rebels, bolstered by civilian militiamen brainwashed by the parchment, had wreaked havoc for too long, attacking supply lines and government infrastructure. But their end was nigh. This assault was the culmination of over a decade of civil strife, a decisive blow that would reunite the nation under one flag, one government, one set of beliefs. By late spring, our units were strategically positioned around the rebel stronghold in Killeen. At precisely 1700 hours, we launched our assault. Mortar shells and automatic weapon fire rained down, a symphony of destruction. Our strategy avoided the use of helicopter gunships initially, as their sound could alert the rebels. Intelligence had also warned us of potential Stinger missiles in the rebels' arsenal, along with looted heavy weapons and armored vehicles. Camouflaged in the scrubland, mere meters from the rebel perimeter, we waited for the precise moment to strike. This operation was more than a military assault. It was the turning point in a war that had torn our nation apart, a chance to mend the fabric of our society and end the influence of a cursed parchment that had brought nothing but chaos and division. When Lieutenant Maiden's 1st Platoon initiated their assault on the northern perimeter of the rebel base, the air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and the echoes of war. The mortars, raining down on the enemy's positions, were like the hammer of justice, demolishing bunkers and trenches, obliterating checkpoints. From my vantage point, I witnessed a rebel checkpoint being annihilated by a direct hit, the guards there meeting a violent end. The 1st Platoon's progress was remarkable. They tore through the rebel lines as if they were paper, encountering surprisingly little resistance. It seemed our surprise attack had caught the rebels off guard. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Lynch's heavy weapons platoon was delivering a punishing barrage, adding to the chaos that enveloped the enemy. As the rebels scrambled to respond, their lines in disarray, Captain Jenkins signaled Lieutenant Wilson's second platoon to advance. They headed toward the western perimeter, where they encountered only sporadic return fire. The rebels seemed unprepared for our coordinated and multi-pronged attack. Wilson's men breached the perimeter fence with ease, creating a gap for us to exploit. I followed close with my third platoon, rushing through the opening they had created. The enemy fire was intensifying, but we pressed on. Suddenly, a warning shout caught my attention. A rebel, dressed in a U.S. Marine Corps uniform, had taken down one of my men. I reacted instantly, neutralizing the threat with precise shots from my M4 rifle. Then, a heart-wrenching scene unfolded. A little girl, no more than 5, with golden braids and wearing a blue sundress, ran towards the fallen rebel, screaming for her father. In the chaos of war, split-second decisions are life or death. When I saw her reach for something, I had to make a call. "She has a gun," I shouted, and my unit echoed. Tragically, she fell over her father's body, a casualty of this brutal conflict. Our rules of engagement were strict. We could only engage armed civilians. This protocol was essential in rapidly neutralizing threats in such treacherous environments. Moments later, another scream pierced the air. A young woman, terror-stricken, stood at the doorway of a building, with several children behind her. This building, I realized, was a school, but not just any school. It was a center where the rebels indoctrinated children into their twisted ideology. I ordered Sergeant Airgood to target the building. He promptly fired a Carl Gustav recoilless rifle, the rocket annihilating the doorway and the woman who stood there, ensuring that no future rebels would emerge from that place of indoctrination. "She has a gun!" we had to shout, even though our hearts knew the grim reality of war. As I moved toward our primary objective, a bullet pinged off the concrete near me. A rebel was firing from a window. Taking cover, I ordered Specialist Driver to set up his 240 Bravo machine gun for suppressing fire. Airgood, meanwhile, used the Carl Gustav to blow apart the doors of our target building. We charged through the smoke and debris, tossing grenades ahead of us to clear the way. Inside, the scene was one of devastation. Rebel fighters, men and women, some in U.S. military uniforms, all armed and now lifeless. The chaos of battle continued as we secured the first floor, encountering fierce resistance but determined to find the parchment. As we cleared each room, the reality of this civil war was starkly evident. Each dead rebel, whether in military or civilian garb, was a reminder of the nation's deep divisions. I narrowly escaped being shot, saved by Sergeant Airgood's quick action. Our progress was steady, but the cost was high. I radioed Captain Jenkins, updating him on our progress. He informed me of heavy resistance outside, but insisted we continue our mission. The parchment was the key. Securing it could end this conflict. As we prepared to advance to the next floor, the weight of our task was palpable. We were deep within the enemy stronghold, surrounded by chaos, but united in our resolve to complete our mission and hopefully bring an end to this long and brutal conflict. After speaking with Captain Jenkins, I turned my attention back to the task at hand. Gunfire echoed from the rear of the building, where Lieutenant Maiden's first platoon was engaged in their diversionary attack. The intensity of our mortars had increased, signaling that the battle was reaching a critical point. As we moved deeper into the rebel base, the hallway was littered with debris and signs of conflict. I instructed the medic to take Private Stern, who had been wounded, into a secure room we just passed and set up an aid station. At the end of the hallway, a T-junction split left and right. To the right, a hallway led to other rooms and a staircase. My men were already clearing that side. To the left, another similar hallway ended at a set of heavy exit doors next to another staircase. Opening the exit doors, I saw 3 of my men firing out. 2 enemy soldiers lay dead, and one of my men was wounded. Sergeant Schumer, injured but alive, told me they had engaged rebels trying to flee. I assured him a medic was on the way and urged him to stay strong. The priority was the parchment, but I couldn't help feeling concerned for my men. In a room next to the stairs, 4 more of my soldiers were engaged in a firefight with retreating terrorists. Through a window I could see the grim aftermath of the battle. Bodies of enemy soldiers in U.S. military uniforms, civilian militia men, all caught in the crossfire. My men were relentless, determined to stop the enemy from escaping. We had to keep pressing forward. Specialist Driver, behind his 240 Bravo machine gun, was a force to be reckoned with. His rounds found their targets among the retreating rebels, but in a moment of sheer brutality, one of the enemy soldiers, a traitorous Marine, managed to fire a shot that fatally wounded Driver. Rage overtook me, and I emptied my magazine into the Marine, ending his threat once and for all. As we tried to gain a tactical advantage from the ground floor, I realized we needed a higher vantage point. I yelled for my men to follow me upstairs, where we could fire down on the enemy from the windows. The rebels, anticipating our move, began firing at the windows as we ascended. One of my soldiers was hit, but I couldn't stop to help. We had to secure the second floor. Once upstairs, we dived for cover. I gestured for my riflemen to open fire on the rebels. The intensity of the battle increased, with both sides exchanging heavy fire. Suddenly, an enemy M240 machine gun opened up, raking our position with deadly accuracy. We took cover again as the hallway was showered with glass and debris. I realized we needed to take out that machine gun. I grabbed the Carl Gustaf and crawled into a maintenance room, which had a ladder leading to the roof. I could hear my men covering me as I ascended. Once on the roof, I had a clear view of the enemy's position. 7 of them were there, 2 traitorous Marines, 3 civilian militia fighters, and 2 Army soldiers manning the M240. I aimed the Carl Gustaf and fired, obliterating the machine gun and its operators. As the remaining rebels tried to regroup, I used the opportunity to throw a frag grenade into their midst. One of the militia fighters, in a futile attempt at heroism, tried to jump on the grenade, her long brown hair a stark contrast to the chaos around her. The explosion signaled a turning point in the battle. The rebels' resistance was crumbling. We had gained the upper hand, and now our primary objective was within reach. The parchment, the source of so much strife and conflict, was somewhere in this building. Securing it meant not just a tactical victory, but perhaps a step towards ending this long and bitter war. With renewed determination, we prepared to search the building and find the artifact that had fueled this conflict, hoping that its capture would bring an end to the bloodshed. As I stood on the roof, witnessing the aftermath of the grenade, the 2 defiant Marines finally succumbed to the barrage of fire from my men. However, their last act of defiance wounded 3 more of my soldiers. This victory was bittersweet, overshadowed by the losses we were suffering. We had secured the building, but our mission was far from over. A bright flash suddenly erupted from Lieutenant Maidan's position, followed by a billowing cloud of smoke. I instinctively ducked, feeling the heat wave that swept over the roof. I raced towards the north side of the building, my eyes stinging from the intense heat and smoke. Peering over the edge, I could see the aftermath of what seemed to be an incendiary explosion, where Lieutenant Maidan's 1st platoon had been entrenched. The trench line was engulfed in flames, and I could hear the harrowing screams of our soldiers. Further to the northeast, I heard the faint sound of mortar rounds and saw smoke rising above the tree line, where Lieutenant Lynch's heavy weapons platoon was positioned. Our mortar support ceased abruptly. I cursed under my breath, realizing the severity of our situation. I needed to reach out to Captain Jenkins, but my radio man, Falaka, wasn't with me. I rushed back across the roof and descended the ladder into the building. Sergeant Ergood and Private First Class Omar were there, with Omar now carrying the radio. Sergeant Ergood informed me that Falaka had been wounded. We had secured the building, but at a high cost, 25 KA, 5 YA, and only 12 operational. I grabbed the radio from Private Omar and contacted Captain Jenkins, expecting a reprimand for my delayed response. He was relieved to hear my voice and urgently inquired about the parchment. Before I could reply, I overheard Lieutenant Wilson in the background, warning of enemy flanking maneuvers. Our situation was dire. Captain Jenkins revealed a shocking truth. General Lincoln had set a trap. First platoon had walked into an explosive ambush, and the heavy weapons platoon was now under attack by M1 tanks from Fort Hood. The revelation that Fort Hood's garrison had joined the rebellion was a devastating blow. How could our own brothers and sisters in arms turn against the government? The influence of the cursed parchment was far-reaching and destructive. As Captain Jenkins's position became increasingly dire, he ordered a tactical retreat, hoping to draw the rebels away from us. I turned to Sergeant Airgood, informing him of the situation, and ordered him to secure the first floor and search for the parchment. Meanwhile, I took a small team to scour the second floor. We quickly descended back to the second floor, small arms fire snapping behind us. I instructed Sergeant Airgood's team to take up defensive positions and begin the search. With Specialist Toffler, Private Omar, and Private Ann, we conducted a thorough room-by-room search. The search for the parchment, the root of all this chaos, turned out to be simpler than expected. It was Private Omar who first noticed something in a conference room, just 2 doors down the right hallway. I was initially angry at him for straying, but his discovery was critical. I stormed into the room, and there it was, the parchment. Dark tan in color, about 18 inches wide, it lay there innocently, yet its mere presence had caused so much pain and destruction. As I gazed upon it, I felt a mix of triumph and dread. We had found the artifact that had torn our nation apart, but at what cost? The weight of the lives lost and the betrayals we had witnessed hung heavily in the air. This parchment had to be secured and removed, to end its malign influence once and for all. With the fate of the nation in our hands, we prepared to extract the parchment from this bastion of rebellion, hoping that its capture would signal the beginning of the end of this terrible conflict. The discovery of the parchment, brittle and ancient, tied with a red ribbon on an oaken table amidst other detestable artifacts of the rebellion, marked a pivotal moment. It was the source of centuries of horror, hatred, and the root of the suffering inflicted upon the United States. Above it hung the flag of the rebellion, a symbol of the anti-government sentiment that fueled this conflict. As I surveyed the room, I spotted a company of rebel terrorists advancing towards our building, identifiable by their U.S. Army 1st Cavalry patches. It was clear they were enslaved to the ideals of this wretched parchment. Specialist Toffler and Private Ann joined me, but I quickly ordered them to secure the next room as we had hostiles approaching from the south. Our orders were explicit. No soldier was to touch the parchment. Only a senior officer was authorized to handle it. I ordered Private Omar to hand me the radio, his eyes widening in shock as I harshly reprimanded him for straying from my side. Just as I prepared to secure the parchment, the window behind me exploded, sending me to the ground with Omar on top of me. He had saved my life, taking the bullet that was meant for me. I was left in shock, realizing the sacrifice of this young soldier who I had doubted. The building was under heavy fire. Sergeant Airgood's voice crackled through the radio, reporting hostiles approaching from all sides, backed by Bradleys. Peering down, I saw one Bradley smoking, yet still active. Our anti-tank capabilities were limited, and we were running out of options. I tried to coordinate with the rest of my platoon, but the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The enemy was advancing, and we were outnumbered and outgunned. In a desperate attempt to turn the tide, I grabbed 2 rounds for the Carl Gustav, planning to get them to Sergeant Airgood. But as I turned the corner, a Bradley's autocannon tore through the wall, killing Specialist Toffler and Private Ann in a gruesome scene. The remaining Bradleys halted their advance, taking cover and preparing for their next move. As I retreated to the room with the parchment, a voice came over the loudspeakers. It was Major General Donald Lincoln, the enemy commander. Standing confidently amidst the chaos, he appealed to us, claiming we had been brainwashed and urging us to read the parchment. His words were filled with sadness and a plea for understanding, but I saw them as nothing but propaganda. I refused to be swayed by his smooth talk and determined to carry out our mission. We couldn't let ourselves be deceived by the enemy's manipulation. Sergeant Airgood's voice came through the radio, asking for instructions. I reiterated our mission, to secure and extract the parchment. Despite General Lincoln's pleas, I was resolute. The nation's fate hinged on our actions, and I couldn't allow doubt to cloud our purpose. Lincoln continued, his voice echoing across the battlefield, suggesting that what we believed to be true might be a lie. But I was undeterred. My loyalty was to the rightful government of the United States, and I was determined to see our mission through, regardless of the cost. As Lincoln's words faded, I prepared to contact Captain Jenkins for fire support. Our situation was desperate, but our resolve was unbroken. We would defend our position and secure the parchment at all costs, upholding our duty to the nation and its rightful government. As I stood in the room, surrounded by the emblems of the rebellion, my thoughts were clouded with a mix of duty and disdain. I aimed my M4 at General Lincoln, intending to use his assassination as a signal for my men to unleash a barrage of gunfire. This would create enough confusion for me to call in supporting fires. But before I could act, one of my soldiers emerged from the downstairs, waving a white flag and offering to surrender our wounded in exchange for safety. In a moment of fury, I shifted my aim and fired at Sergeant Airgood, who had betrayed our cause. His body fell just feet away from General Lincoln, and chaos erupted as my men opened fire on the rebels. The battle intensified, and I reached out to Captain Jenkins for support. To my shock, he informed me that our situation was dire. The Apaches had been seized by the rebels, Lieutenant Wilson was dead, and Jenkins himself was barely holding on with a few men. Our position was rapidly becoming untenable. As I contemplated our next move, a new voice came through the radio, a voice I recognized from many inspiring speeches, the Prime Minister. He expressed gratitude for our sacrifices and asked about the parchment. Despite being offered a chance to leave with the parchment, I declined, following the Prime Minister's order not to read it and to destroy it, along with any other terrorist artifacts. With a sense of solemn duty, I began to destroy the symbols of rebellion. The flag of the United States, which had been twisted into a symbol of hatred, was the first to burn. Next, I destroyed a ceramic statue of a man nailed to a cross, another icon of the rebels' intolerance. Finally, I turned to the parchment. I couldn't help but unroll it, curious about the words that had driven so many to madness. The contents of the parchment sent chills down my spine. It was an abomination, a direct threat to everything our nation and our leader fought for. I set the parchment ablaze, watching as it turned to ash along with the words, "The people of the United States." As the last of my men fell, I knew our mission was accomplished. The heart and soul of the rebellion, their twisted history, had been eradicated. I raised my rifle to my chin, determined to meet my end on my terms. But before I could act, General Lincoln and his soldiers burst into the room. Lincoln solemnly acknowledged the loss, including that of Lieutenant Colonel Omar, a key intelligence officer on their side. He lamented the destruction of the original Constitution of the United States, realizing the fascists' intent to erase and rewrite history. General Lincoln then gazed out at a building that housed one of the few remaining copying machines in the United States, not confiscated by the fascist government. This machine was their secret weapon, a tool to preserve and distribute the true history and ideals of America. As soldiers and civilians worked to save and distribute copies of important documents, a voice filled the room, expressing disbelief and awe at the turn of events. It was a story of resistance, of a fight to preserve truth and history against those who sought to rewrite it for their gain. It was a reminder of the resilience and spirit of the American people, always striving to reclaim and uphold their true values, no matter the odds.